Mutine, adjective, used to describe an individual whose spirit is unyielding, unconstrained, one who navigates life on their own terms, effortlessly. They do not always show up on time, but when they arrive, you notice an individual confident in their contradictions. They know the rules, but behave as if they do not exist. Mutine, the new fragrance by Miu Miu, defined by you.
This podcast is supported by FX's English teacher. Last year's critically acclaimed series returns to follow Evan, Gwen, and Marky as they vie for their students' divided attention. See why Cosmopolitan called its premiere season a masterclass of comedy, while Glamour raved it's the year's funniest and most heartwarming new comedy series. FX's English teacher, all new Thursdays on FX. All episodes now streaming on Hulu.
Greenham Common Women's Peace Camp was an occupation of an American first strike nuclear weapons base in England. Women lived there illegally from 1981 to 1992. So for 11 years, every night women slept illegally on the common. And for 11 years, we got beaten and thrown in jail and evicted and zapped, which is a long story, but I can tell you later. So we didn't leave until there was actually a treaty signed that would get rid of all intermediate nuclear weapons in Europe.
This is Cruising Podcast. I'm Sarah Gabrielli, and you were just listening to Oak Chezar, whose voice you might recognize from our previous Greenham Common episode with Sue, or from the videos of Oak we pulled from that episode for social media. One video in particular has gotten a lot of attention on socials, in which Oak details some creative methods used by Greenham women to disable military vehicles. Some of you have asked to hear her full interview, and we've realized that yes, this is an incredible conversation that absolutely should air in full, even though we've already covered Greenham Common in the Suse episode. Oak brings unique perspectives on nuclear weapons, patriarchy, direct action, and romance at Greenham, as well as all of her own anecdotes from her time there. Oak was 29 years old in 1985 when she arrived at Greenham Common and set up camp there for the next few years. Oak is a writer, and a lot of these stories and more are detailed in a memoir she authored on the subject back in 2020 called Trespassing. Speaking of writers, I have a little cruising announcement. Our lovely producer Rachel has been writing Substack companion pieces to all of our episodes. So once you finish listening, you can check that out at cruisingpod.substack.com.
You know, it was such a big secret in the US, nobody ever heard of it. I've hardly met any women except really old school anti-nuclear activists who ever heard of Greenham Common. But in any other country, if you said that word, women would know because it's world famous. It's the most famous protest. So I heard about it. I was an anti-nuclear activist for years, and I worked with men and women. And I got really tired of working with men for a lot of reasons, but a lot of it was how sexist it all was. Like, we cleaned up and we made the coffee, and it was kind of bullshit. Can I say bullshit? I had heard about it reading left-wing magazines about peace. And I was like, what? This is a thing? There are women-only peace camps in the world? And at the time, there were a bunch of anti-nuclear resistance camps in Europe. They were all over. There were 5 or 6 of them in different countries, and Greenham was the only women's only one, and it was the first one. So I went to Europe. Reagan was reelected in 1984, and I was just like, I'm out of here. This is crazy. Reagan was so scary. Nothing compared to this. but he was a scary president, and so I left, and I was never coming back. I broke up with my lover, and I gave my dog to friends, and I sold my car, and I was never, ever coming back to the US. I was sure of it.
Where were you living at the time?
I was living in a little college town called Fort Collins, which is in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. And just down the road was a terrible, terrible bomb industry called Rocky Flats, and they made all the triggers for every nuclear weapon ever, which every trigger is itself a tiny little nuclear weapon. And it was just about the most irradiated place in this country. That's how I discovered the anti-nuclear movement was I heard about Rocky Flats.
Obviously, it's a very specific kind of person that is exposed to these issues and then wants to put their body on the line for them. And it sounds like also the way that you're writing that it ended up feeling like a necessity to you. Like this is what it felt like you had to do. Like, can you talk a little bit about the way that it felt and feels?
I was also learning about patriarchy at the same time, patriarchy as a system. And what I realized was that the apex of patriarchy is nuclear war. Can destroy the entire planet with one man's finger on the button, completely against life, real death wish, and real domination and violence in support of the death wish. So I really did feel like I had to do it because who was going to do it? Like it was so important, and at Greenham, particularly, it was such a secret, but it was also a secret about Rocky Flats. So many people have no idea they live near the nuclear arms complex. There's a lot of different facilities that produce pieces because they're all made in pieces, all these nuclear bombs. And most people don't even know, neighbors of these places don't know what they do. It's top secret stuff, or it was. I have no idea what it is now.
So you were saying that Reagan was an extremely scary president, especially to be reelected. Can you talk about the political climate at the time and why that was so scary, particularly in regards to nuclear weapons and warfare?
So, the way that the nuclear arms race worked was with this idea of détente. Détente is also how the Cold War worked. It's why we never destroyed Russia and they never destroyed us. It just held us in stasis. And it did that because we would spy on them and they would spy on us. That kept us safe. And when Reagan became president, and he okayed all these nuclear weapons plants in Europe that could actually reach Russia in one shot. Just launch and you take out the Soviet Union. That had never existed before. The idea of spying didn't work anymore because at Greenham, it was cruise missiles, and a cruise missile you could hold on your lap. They're really, really tiny. Instead of these like football field size ICBMs and different nuclear weapons that were huge. These you could hide so easily. You could throw them in the back of a truck. You could throw them under your legs. Like you can just carry these strategic nuclear weapons anywhere. And that totally ended the idea of a nuclear weapons freeze, which was keeping everything sort of peaceful. That's what Reagan did. One of the many, many things that Reagan did that was bad.
Was it Reagan's reelection really that made you make this leap to come to Greenham?
I was just really ready to get out of America, like a lot of people are right now, because I was so disillusioned we could win that, sort of people I thought were sensible, don't know why I ever thought that. I just couldn't believe that a majority of people would vote for him. It's so much like what's happening right now. It's amazing. And I really wanted to go to a women's only protest. I found it amazing to imagine this community of thousands and thousands of women over time. So many women cycled through from all over the world. In this country, if you cross a line, like an imaginary line, they'll just draw a line at a US Air Force base, for instance, that has nuclear weapons. If you cross that line, you go to jail. And so many times, folks would do that just as a symbolic gesture. and they'd go to jail, and nobody ever even knew they did it or that they went to jail. For me, symbolic actions were just bullshit. They didn't do anything. They made us feel like we were protesting, but it didn't accomplish anything. Whereas Greenham was really about putting your life and your body on the line. It was a front lines attack, and it was not as peaceful as we like here in the US.
So what was it like walking into the camp for the first time?
It was so scary because, not because of the weapons, but because the women were not friendly. And I'm a really friendly person, and I love hugs. And in America, you would hug everybody who was a brother or sister activist. Like you were just really effusive with your emotions. And I think in Britain, people are a lot more, not gonna say uptight. Oh, I just said uptight. A lot cooler, especially towards strangers. So they didn't know me, they didn't trust me, and they didn't hug me at all. I mean, they didn't even look at me when I introduced myself. And the camp itself was so dirty and so disorganized. There was just garbage everywhere and food everywhere, and there were no tents. You lived under plastic. It rains all the time in England, and so there were no structures. Women had been evicted so harshly for 4 years that they couldn't afford to just have tents ripped away from them every day anymore. So we just lived under these long sheets of plastic. There was straw bedding. Didn't really want to sleep on straw bedding, and it was cold. It was like August, and it was freezing cold. So those things all made me doubt, like, "What the hell am I doing here?"
Right. Okay, so that's interesting. So they started with tents.
Yes, it started with tents, and we were evicted every day because it was illegal to be there, and so we were evicted by, what they call bailiffs, and what a bailiff is basically a garbage man. They would come with garbage trucks and the police surrounding them, and they would just kick the fire apart, take our backpacks, take passports, take our boots, and definitely tents and bedding were, like, the first thing to go because they knew that it would make our lives really hard, and it did. But I don't think anybody left because of the evictions. Like, I've never seen anybody as committed as these women were to their cause.
I just want to get across like there was no permanent camp.
No.
And you were saying every day. I wasn't entirely sure if it was actually every single morning, but it
Yeah.
was.
It was every day, and in the winter, it was 5 times a day. So and the winters, the days are super short
What?
in Britain. Yeah, so the whole day, the only thing that we could hold on to if we were lucky was pieces of plastic and our own personal stuff. So when we would see the bailiffs and the police coming, we'd throw everything we could into whatever van there was. We had all these crapped out old vans at each gate. So we'd throw everything in, whoever could drive. Very few British women could drive in the 80s. So the women that were driving were all Australian, New Zealand, or USian. We drove. So we would get the hell out of there with all the preciousness. The cops and the bailiffs would descend, and then they would take everything that they could, and we would fight them for it. And so the muncher was what we called this evil, this big orange garbage truck, and they would throw things in there, and it would just, like, grind up everything, passports, boots, whatever they took, and this guy would stand outside just guarding that machine with a cricket bat, and he was a civilian, so he didn't have a gun, but he would just, like, slap that bat against his hand and just stare everyone down. We would blockade we blockaded everything. We would just lay down on the road for any excuse at all, and so a lot of times we would either blockade the cops or blockade the muncher, keeping in mind that they wouldn't kill us. They would arrest us, they would beat us, but they wouldn't open fire.
What a unique, like, safety measure to have that you know you're not gonna get shot by a cop, like, I can't imagine.
Yeah, I know. I wish we had that here, but that is never probably gonna happen again. So we would blockade any vehicle that came in or out of the base, and we would blockade anybody that was going down the road.
I mean, there was the action that you wrote about where someone had the idea to lock the gates in so that the convoys couldn't get out.
Yeah, so the vehicles would come out of the main gate mostly, and that was Yellow Gate, and I lived at Yellow Gate for a long time. So we had heard that the convoy was gonna be coming out the next day, and, we went and bought big chains and padlocks. Not in the town that was near the camp because nobody would sell us anything because they just hated us, and we all smelled really strongly of wood smoke, and it was hard to disguise that. Like, I smelled of wood smoke probably for a year. It was, like, embedded in my pores after I left. So you couldn't just be like, "Hello, I'm just here to get" you couldn't fool them. They'd be like, "Get out, you filthy" whatever. So we got a hold of a bunch of big, heavy padlocks, big, heavy chains, and then we all had, they call them prams, but they're baby carriages, and in the baby carriages, we kept our food, we kept wood and kindling, we kept newspapers and the mail, the post when it came, because they were on wheels, and so we can roll them away fast during an eviction. So what we did was we put the chains and the locks in the prams and covered them with a blanket so nobody could see them. And then these 3 elderly women just kind of very seriously marched towards the gate, which was open because the convoy was coming out. It's the only time they ever opened the gate. Marched towards the gate singing some very serious peace song, and the guards rushed to shut the gate tight, as we knew they would because they felt threatened. As soon as it was shut, we just whipped those chains around the gate, put these giant padlocks on, and just started singing and going crazy and laying down in the road and blockading, and they tried as hard as they could. They couldn't get those padlocks off, and they couldn't break through the chains were super thick.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know why they couldn't figure it out, but they couldn't. And eventually, they brought in horses with, cops riding them. They surrounded us with fire trucks, and they took the gates off the hinges and just crashed them down. They took the whole gate apart. That was the only way that they could get out. But by then, there were so many women because we had put out the word that this was gonna happen, so thousands of women were there that night, and that was fun because when there were just 15 of us, it was really dangerous, but with thousands, it was cool.
And with media there too, I think you wrote about that there was also press.
Yes, right, and we had called the media, all the media that were our allies, like The Guardian and, a few of the other sort of mainstream papers, and then all the radical papers. Yeah, so they were on camera the whole time, and they couldn't hurt us too bad because it would look terrible kicking around a bunch of women and old women, that would be bad press.
Which is what they did every day, but
But they did every day off camera.
I love that story too. I love that so often it just sounds like you all are this thorn in their side that will just it doesn't matter what they take away from you, how they beat you down. It's like, okay, what are we going to do to inconvenience them now? It almost feels like a little sibling that's just intent on ruining your life. Do you know what I mean?
We would score and then they would score and then we would I mean, if it wasn't so serious,
Yeah.
it wasn't like life on earth hanging by a thread, then it would have been really a fun game, and it kinda was a fun game as well.
How many different camps were there just within Greenham Common? Because I know there was like different colors that you used to
Right.
refer to them.
So the base was 9 miles around, and all around were these different camps, and they called them the Air Force. It was the United States Air Force, I should say that. Um, and it was basically a US base in the middle of England that was staffed by, British soldiers and American soldiers, British police and American police. So every camp was at a different gate in, a different gate that opened onto a highway where they could come and go with all the military vehicles, including the bombs. So at every gate, we set up women's peace camps. They, the military, called those gates Alpha Gate and Bravo Gate, all the things that they say in the military. And we called our peace camps red gate and orange gate and blue gate. So we named it after the rainbow. It was 7, it was perfect. And so women would live at these different gates, and they were autonomous gates. We didn't see each other much, except once a month we would have a money meeting. It was the only meeting I ever went to at Greenham. There were no other meetings, which also blew my mind because in the US, there was so much process meetings and so many organizing meetings. Greenham, it was way spontaneous. So it was like, "I'm gonna cut into the fence right now. Who's got the bolt cutters? Who's coming with me?" And you women would come or not, and every single day there was an action that you could join or not join. There weren't even process sessions after to be like, "How do you feel? How was that for you? What do you need?" None of that. So to back up for a second, the Air Force bases in the United States have a sign on the fence that say, "Use of deadly force authorized." That means if you step over the line, if you touch the gate, they can knock you down with bullets and it's legal. And so you couldn't do any direct action. They would have been killed. We never could have gotten away with the actions that we did at Greenham if we were in this country, which was another great reason to leave this country.
Right.
I lived in a variety of gates. I'm a big walker, and so I knew everybody at the camp because I would do this 9-mile loop every few days, and I would visit because that's me. So I got to know a lot of women.
How did you get in their good graces? Because obviously you ended up being really close with the people that you were working with.
Yeah, I had a lot of great friends, but it took a while. The first month, I would say, there were some other, honestly, American women who were friendly to me. And as I would do actions with the other women, they would warm up. But because I've always been a writer, I carry a pen and paper everywhere all the time now still. And I would take notes, fierce notes. I'd be writing a lot. And so women really thought that I was a CIA agent and I was taking names. So that was another thing that I had to break through to make them trust me.
Do you remember your first action? Did you kind of get right into it right away?
Yes. Yes, I totally remember. I got there on, the 5th of August, which led up to Hiroshima Day and then Nagasaki Day, which are the high holy monster days for anti-nuclear activists. Those were the first nuclear bombs ever and the last for now. And so the second night, there was a big action. Second night I was there was a big action. It was like, anybody can come. And I was like, I want to come. And everyone ignored me, but I kind of tagged along. And that action was to cut the fence, which happened all the time. We had bolt cutters. Every gate had bolt cutters, and those got confiscated too, but they're not expensive. We just replace them. So a bunch of women with bolt cutters led the way, cut holes in the fence, and the rest of us went in and just swarmed the place. It was an Air Force base, so there were really long runways and planes taking off all the time. So we went to the runways and we spray painted the runways and we snuck up on the different buildings. And anyway, we got arrested, which you almost always got arrested when you went into the base, even though you were quiet and you were real cool about it. And then we got put in these porta cabins, which are, like little trailers, and that's where they would hold you, and then they would come and interrogate you, take your picture, and then let you go. So I didn't go to jail for a while.
And you would always give fake names, right? Or at least most people would give fake names, and
Yes.
that was totally fine.
Yeah, it's legal in England to give a fake name when you're arrested, as long as you're not trying to avoid arrest. And I mean, they already have you, so you're not trying to avoid. So I gave my grandmother's name that first night, and that felt pretty darn good. I think I gave her name quite a few times, actually. But we would make up names. Everybody would make up a name.
Yeah, and well, you also had to make sure that you weren't gonna be deported.
Yes, that was a thing, and that was another reason to give a fake name. But it was really funny because women would give the name of, like, Virginia Woolf or Adrienne Rich or some famous, lesbian hero, and then you'd go to jail, and then you'd go to court, and they'd be like, "Virginia Woolf," and you'd have to stand up. "Sure, Miss Firestone, okay." And so it just kept going as if it was real. It was the funniest thing in the world.
So you probably couldn't even begin to count how many times you were arrested then if it was just such commonplace.
I was arrested a lot, a lot, a lot. I counted 11, but I also lost track.
Can you talk a little bit about the kinds of actions that you would commonly do? I feel like you wrote about potatoes, sugar, lots of spray painting, that sort of thing.
We would go after vehicles a lot because there was a cruise missile convoy. The cruise missiles, which are very small, as I said, they go on these giant, like, mutant semi trucks, and they're called erector launchers, which we all thought was pretty funny. So they would put one missile each on a truck. There were 100 nuclear missiles at Greenham. So once a month, they would go out and they would go out to practice launching without hopefully actually launching, but they would leave the base, and we always knew when they were leaving the base because somebody was constantly on the gate with binoculars just watching to see what the movements of the Air Force were gonna be, and whenever they saw that the convoy was getting ready, packing up or lining up to leave the base, somebody would jump in a car, go around that big oval and tell every gate as they were driving by fast, yell out the window, "Launchers are leaving." And so in that convoy, there would be like a bunch of missile launchers, and then there would be ambulances and police cars, and they call them Dodges, but they were just Dodge, made big old trucks. It was like a whole army convoy, Air Force convoy, and so it was great to be able to sneak into the vehicle compound and be able to disable some of these machines. So it was easy to let the air out of the tires, that was simple. But we would a lot of times, and I love this, take, instant mashed potatoes and just put them in the gas tank or, take ping pong balls and put them in the gas tank, and what ping pong balls do is it looks fine, you start driving, the fuel or whatever the hell is happening in an engine, I really don't understand, pulls the ping pong ball down, it blocks something, and the vehicle stops. It stops, they turn it off, and the ping pong ball floats back up to the surface, so they could never figure out what the heck was happening to their vehicles. And of course, the instant mashed potatoes would mix with the fluids and just harden right up. Or we would spray paint the vehicles. There was, just a couple of fences around the vehicle compound, whereas around the base, there were 10 rows of fences. It was harder to cut in there. It took a lot of work, but it was easy enough to cut into the vehicle compound. I really like the more creative actions. There was a time when the Air Force at Greenham got these geese, these, like, big white geese, and put them in the vehicle compound, and, their purpose was to be like guard dogs because geese are fierce. If you disturb them, they're just honking and being loud, and so they would kind of be like a little alarm system if there were women up to, hijinks, and so when we found out about that, which we did when we went to destroy the vehicle compound one more time, like, "All these geese, what the hell?" And so that night, women went they had soaked raisins in whiskey for the whole day, and then they got these pillowcases they cut into the vehicle compound, and they just grabbed the geese and fed them the raisins, and they got really goofy, and then they stuffed them in a pillowcase, took them out, and gave them to another woman who had a farm nearby, and so and then they went and, spray painted the runways, "Geese for Peace," and I thought that was a very lovely, nonviolent, nobody got arrested action.
I mean, you also gave a beautiful life to these geese, which I love as well.
Yeah. We did a lot because it was raining all the time. It probably rained 85% of the time, and it's cold in England, and we were outside. always outside, and so, there was a lot of trying to keep dry. There was a lot of trying to sort out food because we had to cook 3 meals a day in the pouring rain, and there was a lot of just sitting around and visiting and telling stories, which that really was my favorite part, even more than the actions, was just telling stories about our lives or just telling stories about what had happened at Greenham. Um, those were great stories, and visitors would come all the time, and so we had reason to tell stories about Greenham to them. So there was a lot going on besides envisioning actions, but that was every day too.
How long did it take you to kind of feel at home there and stop questioning what the hell have I gotten myself into?
Probably a couple of weeks, maybe a month to really feel, um, affection from other women.
Could you give a guess of what portion of the women were lesbians?
Yeah, I think a lot of the women were lesbians. When Greenham started, it started when it was a secret that there were these nuclear weapons coming to England from the US. But somehow it leaked out, however things leak out. And so a bunch of people in Wales, which is quite far away from where the peace camp was, decided that they were going to walk to Greenham for days just to get the word out that this was actually happening. And how do you get the word out? You get the word out through media. To this day, that's how you get the word out. And so when they first marched, it was women with their husbands, with their babies, a lot of heterosexual women who were grandmas and moms. And so when they first came, it was that. It was just mostly straight women. I'm sure there were some dykes in there somewhere. But as time passed, it became more and more this radical lesbian space. And by the time I got there, it was very high percentage lesbians. But there were also nuns, and there were also grandmas and Buddhist monks and women who would never identify as lesbians, but were proud to know lesbians, you know?
Do you know how it happened, how it went from this march to the common to then being an encampment?
Yeah, so after days and days of walking, they got to the base, which just had a really puny little fence around it because it was a secret and who was gonna do anything with that? They came and they realized they hadn't gotten any press at all, nothing. There'd been a total press blackout. And so they thought, well, we need to up the ante so we get some coverage. So they chained themselves to that little fence. And eventually it started to rain harder. And so women from the village brought them tea and whiskey and whatever they needed, and they settled down. It was just this really spontaneous, "Surely this won't last for very long." Like, nobody in that original march thought, "11 years later, there'll still be women living here night and day."
Oh my
But
god.
that's how it started, and it wasn't a lesbian endeavor particularly.
Yeah, but it sort of transitioned into being women only. Men were not allowed to stay there at a certain
No.
point, right?
One could come until dark, and reporters could come, but we really requested we were in the papers all the time by then, by the time I got there, and we requested women journalists would come, but men would come and they would bring their wives cartons of cigarettes or bottles of whiskey. The men that came to support us were amazing because they also brought boots, more plastic, tents that would immediately get confiscated, and food. Like, we lived off of what people brought us, donations that were brought to us because we didn't leave, so nobody worked a job with money. Nobody shopped, like, who the hell had time to shop? And the town was quite a distance away, so shopping was inconvenient, but we were supported with money as well. We were supported with everything we needed because so many groups really appreciated what we were doing.
Right. And so it's partially a lot of this is that the media does pick up this story and continues to cover a lot of the actions, right? So can you talk a little bit about the way that what the women were doing was able to impact public opinion and the way that that coverage ended up affecting the outside world?
Right, I think it really did. And a lot of it, I think, was word of mouth, where people just disseminated information without the media. There were more conservative outlets of newspapers and more liberal or progressive. And so there were some journals that came out that were lesbian journals, and those reporters came all the time. There was another magazine called Peace News, and they just wrote about peace activities. They came all the time. But then there was the more conservative papers that would just say terrible things about us. That we were just wrecking the countryside and hurting the neighbors' property values, which I think we must have done, which is fine with me. But yeah, so we got trashed by the media as well as lauded by the media.
But I imagine that either way, it had this impact on the way people were thinking about nuclear weapons. Is that true?
Right, and even if they were saying shit about us, they still had to say, "Hey, this nuclear weapons base exists in this peaceful little, quiet, expensive, really expensive village in South England." It was one of the most expensive counties in all of Britain.
Was it common outside of radical activist communities for people to fear nuclear warfare and to really be anti-nuclear weapons? How did that work? Or was there a sort of a shift in public opinion?
I think about here, and I think about just war in general and how people think that it's either justified or it's keeping them safe. The propaganda about nuclear weapons is this is what's keeping Russia from overrunning Europe or the USSR from overrunning Europe is that, look, we have all this defense. And so people saw it as defense. I think a lot of people, particularly female people, were appalled at the idea of a weapon that could destroy all life on Earth. And I think it's that way to this day. I think the idea of weaponry and war is very gendered still.
You actually don't have to spend big bucks or tons of time in the kitchen in order to make delicious food at home. When you use EveryPlate, you get restaurant-level deliciousness week after week with recipes like crispy buffalo ranch chicken and cheesy Mexican street corn hash, to name a few. You'll spend less on your EveryPlate orders than you would at a restaurant and even on your normal groceries. I personally hate making decisions about what I'm going to buy and what I'm going to eat, and EveryPlate does all of that thinking for you, and they're easy to follow recipes. You're always getting fresh ingredients, you're always getting variety. I seriously love using EveryPlate, and I know you will too. So what are you waiting for? Dig into these flavor-packed meals your household will love. New customers can enjoy this special offer of only $1.99 a meal. Go to everyplate.com/podcast and use code CRUISING199 to get started. Applied as discount on first box, limited time only.
Mint is still $15 a month for premium wireless. And if you haven't made the switch yet, here are 15 reasons why you should. 1, it's $15 a month. 2, seriously, it's $15 a month. 3, no big contrast. 4, I use it. 5, my mom uses it. Are you playing me off? That's what's happening, right? Okay, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, $15 per month equivalent required. New customer offer first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
This message is sponsored by Greenlight. With school out, summer is the perfect time to teach our kids real-world money skills they'll use forever. Greenlight is a debit card and the #1 family finance and safety app used by millions of families, helping kids learn how to save, invest, and spend wisely. Parents can send their kids money and track their spending and saving, while kids build money confidence and skills in fun ways. Start your risk-free Greenlight trial today at greenlight.com/Spotify. That's greenlight.com/Spotify.
Tonight, turn down the noise of the day and focus on the rest with AGZ, the nightly drink for winding down and resting up. New from AG1. AGZ supports your body's natural sleep cycle with clinically studied key herbs, adaptogens, and minerals in amounts supported by research. And no melatonin, helping you wake feeling rested. Wind down, rest up with AGZ. Learn more at drinkagz.com.
Can you sort of explain the concept of separatism and why at the time it felt really essential to what you were doing?
Yeah, this was before there was any awareness of trans struggles except within the trans community itself.
Yeah, and I should preface this question and conversation about separatism that trans women are women and trans men are men, and we can kind of move forward with that.
Right.
That is our stance, and with that in mind, if you don't mind explaining separatism, that'd be great.
This was the '80s, and it really felt like separatism was the most radical thing you can do as far as fighting for gender rights and also subverting patriarchy. Separatism is so subversive. There have always been separatist movements and separatist people that weren't particularly anti-nuclear. I come from European Jewish background, and my grandfather never learned to speak English. My grandmother and grandfather lived on the Lower East Side. They only shopped in Jewish bakeries. They only read Jewish newspapers. They only went to Jewish theaters. And there was a lot of that going on in the 20s, 1920s in the Lower East Side. There were 500,000 Jews from Europe. Tiny. I don't know if you've ever been to the Lower East Side, but it's like this big. And so there was this whole culture. And I think of Chinatown, different Chinatowns in this country where people don't assimilate. So it's a refusal to assimilate with the oppressor's culture. And that's what lesbian separatism was. And I think all separatism is it's a way to close the door, have your own culture, and just turn your back on the mainstream culture, which you see as threatening to your existence. That's what I think about separatism.
Yeah, I mean, and it's obviously so threatening when it's linked to war and especially nuclear war.
Threatening when it's linked to women because, as we know, women are pretty necessary to patriarchy. And if women stepped away from patriarchy, boy, that would really shake shit up. And so that's what we were doing. We were trying as hard as we could to live outside of patriarchy. I think that was the most powerful thing is that we turned our back on the most ancient, powerful system on this planet.
Yeah, and it's so interesting you were talking about having just been learning about patriarchy for the first time and really understanding what it all was. Is that something that was going on culturally when you were learning about it? It is was kind of the first time people were really talking about it?
Yeah, I don't know that people really said that word much and understood it. I think women understood that there was this giant system in place that did not include them and was openly hostile to them. And every institution supported that hostility and domination. But I don't think we really had broken it down to look at every institution in our culture, confirming that patriarchy and upholding it. That system is in place because of education and law and the family and government and Hollywood. And there's a bunch of institutions that run the culture, and they're all totally in support of and policing patriarchy.
You were saying that you weren't at risk of being killed while doing these actions, but of course there was still a lot of police brutality that happened. It seems like
Yeah.
almost any time you were coming in contact with them.
Yeah, I mean, the cops would put their hands on us and drag us around and, sexually, assault some women. The book is framed around this action that I was in where we had cut our way into the largest arms depot storage unit in Europe, and we got caught, and we got the shit beat out of us, and then they threw us in solitary confinement, and we were in solitary for 5 days, and they broke 2 of my ribs. They shredded Rebecca's knee like it's still not okay, she still walks with a cane. It's been, like, 41 years or something, and I had 2 broken ribs, and I never even saw a doctor. They wouldn't send a doctor. They just kept us in these tiny concrete cells. So that was violence. That hurt. And also it was violence to keep us in solitary confinement, I think. But that was one way of getting hurt. Women would get dragged through barbed wire. The base fence was all this concertina wire, at the top, which is like razor wire that's coiled, and it was everywhere on the ground. And women, if they were caught inside the base, would be dragged through that. I was dragged by my hair a bunch of times. I finally shaved my head because I just felt so vulnerable having something they could grab. But they would grab us all over our bodies. And so it was very violent, but not lethally violent.
Did you all sort of not want to participate in any systems that might be like regulatory of that kind of treatment, or was there just nothing in place? There was nothing to be done.
No, I mean, if we had lawyers and could go to court, I still don't think anything could be done because we were trespassing every second. So we would be seen as in the wrong, and people would say, "Well, if you don't like it, like, get the hell out of there, go home. What are you, stupid?" And especially with the zapping, like, it was, "Just go home and stop complaining."
We should explain what we mean by zapping because it's extremely interesting and we've just been alluding to it. So, when did you first hear that this was something that might be happening or something that was being done?
You know, in the stories that we would tell around the campfire, that would come up a lot, and I really didn't understand what it was until I felt it in my body. I felt really sick. We all felt really sick at times. You know, I have notes on what the zapping is because it's very emotional for me, and so I it's hard to just put into words off the cuff, but, apparently, zapping is an electronic weapon that had been used for over 50 years by the military of the United States and the Soviet Union. And women would get super sick. They would get pain in their head. They would get fear, incredible fear and paranoia. They would get hot. They would get just really messed up. And women would even have really violent dreams and feel super paranoid. And, you know, you would look through the fence, and of course you felt paranoid because we were surrounding nuclear war. For some women, it just felt like walking through a solid wall of energy that went all through the base fence. So the electronic weapons that zapping is related to are the next field after atomic weapons. They're called auto technology and they're electromagnetic radiation. So, fluorescent lights and strobe lights and radio waves, they all cause zapping to a very small degree, and power lines and satellite transmissions, they all alter your emotions if you're caught in their signals. And they have been proven to change your brainwave patterns and affect your emotions. So we just knew that we felt really sick. We felt we were being irradiated and we weren't sure what it was, but we blamed the weapons, like they're leaking or they're too close, like we feel sick. And I remember one day, two women woke up in their tents at two different parts of the camp and they were sunburned. Like their skin was so hot that you could feel it from like 3 inches above their skin. You could feel the heat radiating, and it had been raining for months. Like, I don't think the sun ever came out. And so we got really scared. And we contacted this woman, Rosalie Bertel, who was a pediatrician from Canada, and she was a nun. And she had spent her whole career studying children who had cancer from living near nuclear power plants and nuclear bomb factories. And somebody had told us about this woman. So we wrote to her and said, "Hey, this thing is going on." And she came. And she came with a whole bunch of assistants, and they had sensors and different equipment that they set up all around the base. And they measured these completely invisible beams that were hurting us. And then she went away and sent us information when they had all run a lot of tests. So we had pictures of the cops when the convoy was coming out holding what looked like small megaphones. And she said those were called photic drivers, like photon, like PHOTIC, photic drivers. And what she told us was that they can disperse that beam of electromagnetic radiation to cover a wide area and make everyone feel vaguely sick, or they could focus it on one person like the perceived leader of a protest, and they could blow that person's heart right up. Like they could give them a heart attack. And so it was used as crowd control. The South African embassy, when I lived there, it was still apartheid. So there was a nonstop picket at the South African embassy in London. And these helicopters would just come in and hover, and those people were being zapped. In Northern Ireland, there was a huge war going on with the British and lots of just sort of terrorism on both sides. And the Northern Irish radical activists were getting zapped as well. We were like guinea pigs to them that they could experiment on us with this shit, because we never left. We were always there, and they could watch us and listen to us talking. They had directional microphones in the trees in the forest, and they could hear everything we were saying. And so they could just sort of chart the actions and reactions that these weapons were doing to us. So we were like, you know, rats in a cage, I guess. And what Rosalie Bertell said at the end is these will cause cancer eventually, and they settle in your soft tissues and organs. The zapping settles in your soft tissues and your organs, and that for women, those are mostly reproductive organs that are being like I didn't get my period for 5 months when I lived at Greenham, and there were women who were in their 70s and 80s, they came to protest, and they got their periods again, like they hadn't bled for 20 years. So it was affecting definitely our reproductive organs, I would say. It was pretty insidious stuff.
So do you know a lot of people that have had lasting ailments from the zapping that sort of still deal with that?
Well, I have. I've had a ringing in my ears since 1987. Um, my arthritis is really bad, and my ADD is really bad. It wasn't really bad when I went to the peace camp, and I have a lot of just forgetfulness. I mean, I'm 69 years old, and so that's kind of par for the course, but I've always been, since I came back, I've always just had a lot of holes in my memory. And I don't know, I think women have died of cancer, but women are dying of cancer constantly everywhere, it seems. But I would really like to do some kind of survey about who has gotten sick and how they've gotten sick. People would say you need to leave. And we would say, well, not going to leave. If we leave, they win. And then other people would say, but if you die, they win. Like, so it was really hard. I finally did leave after 3.5 years because I was so sick. I was so sick from the zapping.
And so some people, it affected some people worse than others, and that kind of would dictate if you were able
Way
to stay.
more. Yes. Some women would say that they didn't feel anything, and we shouldn't even talk about it because it was taking the focus off of nuclear weapons, and that's why we were there. But a lot of women talked about it to the media, to visitors, to anybody who would listen.
I mean, it's so interesting, especially this decision to stay or go when you're dealing with this. You're being told that you could die. Like you're being told this is going to cause cancer and it could literally be fatal, but you're here trying to protect human life on Earth. I mean, it's extremely admirable to be ever making the decision to stay in that situation, but what a tough I imagine it was really hard to then make the decision to leave.
You know, women would say it's dangerous here, but it's no less dangerous out there where you could be raped or beaten or, get cancer anyway because we live in a toxic terrarium. And so the women that were most diehard would be like, it's not safe anywhere. So why would we give up this extremely important movement?
One of the parts of the book that I loved getting a little insight into is sort of the way that it reads like you'd all been trained in sort of how to talk to law enforcement or how to sort of talk to people about the movement and try to get them to understand and try to get them to stop doing their jobs, basically. I would love to hear a little bit of the kinds of things that you would say to law enforcement when you got the chance.
Well, when we were having big actions, and they were almost always about the convoy going out into the countryside and playing war games, we would be surrounded by 200 police. It was always 200 police. And sometimes there'd be like, 15 of us, 200 police, and they would surround us and they would just hold us for an hour or 2 hours until it didn't matter if we were free. We couldn't stop anything by the point they let us go. They would keep us contained until the convoy had gotten to wherever it was going. And so we had all the time in the world to talk to them, to like make eye contact and really speak to their humanity or try to speak to their humanity. And so we would say, like, do you have children? And what do you know about nuclear war? Like, there were British cops. And so we'd be like, why are you protecting a bunch of Americans that have pretty much infiltrated the soil of your country? Why are you ruining your karma and your soul and your heart? I'm sure it hurts your heart. Or we would say, the zapping is on and I feel really sick. Do you feel it? Do you feel sick? How's your vision right now? Because sometimes it would really affect your vision and it would be like the air was like tweed patterns in the air, fractals in the air. So if you were feeling that, you would say to the cop, like, "Do you see what I'm seeing?" And they would ignore us, or talk about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, talk about the morality of nuclear weapons and war in general. And they would usually just ignore us and make jokes about us and insult us. But sometimes I felt like you were getting through. And in Britain, a soldier can buy out their commission. And so if they are in the army, they're commissioned to be in the army for however many years they agree to. But if they have money and they don't like being in the army, they can buy their way out. And so we would talk to them about that. There were some women that were just there for the explicit purpose of getting soldiers to resign their commission and doing this pretty symbolic but really important piece of the work. So they talked to soldiers a lot because the soldiers were on the fence all the time watching us and marching. And you could talk to them. They'd just be standing there watching us and you could talk. And those guys they weren't on like a red alert like the cops were when the convoy was going out. That was a really heavy duty time, but otherwise, these guys were just hanging out, being bored, and we'd be like, "Hey, my name's Oak. What's your name?"
Do you know of anyone ever buying out, or did it ever get through to someone?
Yeah, I think there were a few soldiers who did buy their commissions out, but you had to have money. You couldn't do it if you were poor, and most soldiers are poor, right?
Right. I mean, you have to imagine the kind of person that ends up in that position. That's just a huge life change. Oh, can you talk about the singing and how important and sort of centered the all of your songs were?
Oh, yeah, we had some great songs. Women had been singing these songs for years. I think some of them are old peace movement songs or old wobbly organizing songs like union songs, and we would just take them and change the words so that it was about being dykes on the front line and fighting for peace. I mean, I mentioned the fire circle before, but because it was raining all the time, we sat outside, but we sat around a fire that was always, always, always a fire. It never went out except when the bailiffs, got it all wet, and then we just light another fire. And so you'd sit around the campfire and you'd sing, and it would warm you up, and it would, I think, create a real communion, a sense of communion among us. So yeah, songs were really important. All art was really important at the peace camp because we were making culture. So why not have art?
The songs specifically, though, you would sort of use them in the middle of actions or in the middle of conflict, right?
Right, good point. Yeah, and in jail. Like, we would sing in jail a lot. We would sing at blockades, and we would sing when stuff was scary. I think singing can really raise the vibrations of your spirit. It could raise your spirits. So when everything is dire and you're bleeding or you're getting, thrown in a cell or just watching this nuclear convoy go by and not being able to stop it, songs could really lift your spirits.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. What about romance? Was there a lot of lesbian love going on?
Yeah, there was a lot of lesbian love going on and sort of, celebrating of lesbian love and relationships. I think I had something that I wanted to read. And then there are crushcapades, the fierce and furious flirting, like riding a runaway horse blindfolded on a rocket ship. Couples would come together, they would let go, they would play together. It was like a seesaw. And then they would get off and they would move on. Coupling and uncoupling with the apparent ease of toy train cars. Any idea of serious relationship here is challenging, like trying to start a fire with wet wood. This place is too unsettling to encourage settlement. I think, women would come as couples. They could usually weather it and still have a long-term relationship. But there was just a lot of flirting going on. And I think, like for me, I'd never been anywhere where there were that many lesbians. So it was just this huge field of possibilities. And it was pretty sexy doing these radical actions like, side by side. But the other thing is it was always cold. I don't think I ever took my clothes off except to jump in a shower and out again and get dressed. And so if you were in a tent and you were making love to another woman, it was very rare that everybody would be naked. You would just work around, 5 layers of sweaters or 3 layers of trousers or so that was challenging and creative as well.
I can't imagine being around that many just like brilliant, strong, brave women. I would just, the crushes would be like, I wouldn't know where to look.
Oh, yeah. Well, I had a total crush for 3.5 years that just unrolled, and there were a lot of women who were the objects of my crushes. And I'm still in touch with some of them, which is very cool.
So, what was it like then when you had to leave?
So it was like maybe 3 years into it, I met a woman, and she lived in the south of England in Cornwall, and she had a place she owned land, which was super rare for a woman. As rare as it was for a woman to drive, it was more rare for a woman to own land. And she would bring any Greenham woman that had been hurt or was really sick or had come out of prison after a long time. Some women went to prison for 4 months, 5 months. She would bring them to her place and they would recuperate with her. She was a Pisces and she would cook and love them up and give them lots of, nourishment. Anyway, I went to her house. How I fell off a truck one time and broke my skull open, and I heard about her, and so I went to her place, and we fell in love. And she used to come to the camp like once a month and make soup and then go away. And so I lived with her for a couple of weeks, and then I had to get back. And so she would come with me, but then she had to get back. And the idea of being in love and having access to someplace else that was still where Greenham was still available. So I went home with her and stayed when I was really zapped out, really sick, and then once a month we would go back. So I spent about another 6 months just visiting for a week every month and then going back with her. One of the things that I think is important about the peace camp was a lot of women lived there but had a place in London or had a place in somewhere else. They were British and they had another home. So they would go back and forth and visit and stay and then go home. I had no place else to stay. So I just stayed at camp all the time. And I think that might be one reason I got so sick because I never got out of those rays, never. So it was nice to just get a chance to have a bath and have peace and just rest.
But also not have to re-enter normal society right away. Did that then end up being really difficult for you, or is that something that you never feel like you did necessarily?
Well, I didn't. I mean, I think I've always been a radical activist and a radical lesbian. Like, that hasn't changed for me. But after Greenham, I had heard about lesbian land when I was at Greenham, and most lesbian lands in the country then were in the United States. Never heard of them in the United States. I had to go to Europe to hear about them. So when I left there and came back to the States, my sweetheart came with me, and we just spent a year going to different lesbian lands all around the country, looking for the place that we were gonna settle down and live forever. And so I got to go to all these different lands. I settled in one, and then for another 3 years, I only lived in a very separatist state on women's lands, which were really different than Greenham because although they were filled with really interesting lesbians, they were not particularly political. You know, the idea of removing yourself from patriarchy is inherently political, but we weren't standing up to any government edicts. We weren't protesting nuclear war. It was very quiet and very peaceful. So that was a great reentry for me. I could just write and love and be in beautiful places. They're all in beautiful places in the country and countryside. I settled for the longest at a place called ARF, which stands for a lot of things. Women say it's an acronym for Another Radical Feminist or Amazon Reality Forever. There's a whole lot of ideas for the acronym, but I think really it was because we all had dogs and there were coyotes everywhere around us. So there was a lot of howling and barking, and I think that's why it was called ARF. But it's in the mountains outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico. Beautiful, beautiful place. I went to Seneca for a while because that was a little more relaxing than getting arrested and beaten up. Yeah, there was a bunch. There was just a whole lot. Oh, and the Ozarks are full of women's lands.
Do you think that any still exist?
Yes, definitely.
They do?
Many of them still exist.
And you know where
Yeah.
they are? I
Yeah. I know where a lot are, and what happened with me is when I first started looking, I would go to the first place I heard of, and then I'd hear about 5 more places, and I'd check them
Right,
out.
because that's where they know about it.
Yeah, it was like the Underground Railroad for lesbians. I think partly, it's dangerous for men to know. Like, we would really get hassled. Our cars would get broken into, and we'd have, like, death threats pinned to the driveway or whatever. But I think now it's wild because a lot of these lesbian lands, started in the late '60s, so women have lived there since they were in their 20s and now they're in their 80s. And they've never assimilated into patriarchal society, never worked a job, never paid taxes, just really, really a lot of integrity. Another part is all these lands, because the women are in their 70s and 80s, most of them would love younger women to come and just help haul water and help with the garden and, just help us out because it's hard. Like, physically, it's hard.
To backtrack a little, we still have to talk about how Greenham ended.
So eventually, I think because of all the pressure that we had put on and how bad we made them look and how much the word did get out into other countries, even into the United States a little tiny bit, they negotiated a treaty. Gorbachev was the president of the USSR then, and he was like the most rational, nice guy. And he and Reagan signed a treaty that they would get rid of all intermediate range nuclear weapons in Europe, which the weapons at Greenham were. And so it took them 3 years, but they moved all those weapons out. Greenham was the last place to sort of be liberated of nuclear weapons because it was the first place where we started. So they just kind of went backwards and they got rid of the weapons and they took down the fence. They took away all those buildings. There were a lot of buildings inside that base. And even the silos where the nuclear weapons were stored, it was all converted into this beautiful peace park. And there's a sculpture there signed to the women of Greenham Common, "You Can't Kill the Spirit," which is one of the songs that we sang. Some women stayed for 11 more years just to make sure every single thing got cleaned up. That was way more than the original 11 years that most of us stayed. Like, they didn't vaporize those weapons, that probably would have been very dangerous. They didn't disappear those weapons, they put them on submarines and who knows where they put them. They reused the uranium and plutonium, but they weren't at Greenham anymore, and they were gone from Britain, all those bases.
And I read somewhere that Gorbachev directly credited Greenham women for their part in all of this.
Yeah, and I was there when he flew in. He and his wife, whose name was Raisa, they flew in to meet with Thatcher, who was the prime minister at the time, and, they landed in another Air Force base, not Greenham, but we knew they were coming, and so a bunch of women got there the day before and wrote spray painted in huge letters, "Greenham women welcome Raisa Gorbachev." So they saw that as they were, like, landing in their jet plane.
But then the treaty, the INF treaty, that was the big deal that they signed, just to get real contemporary and political for a second. In 2019, Trump and Putin, like, destroyed it.
I didn't know that, but I wouldn't be surprised at all. I mean, those guys are all about nuclear. I really think we're gonna have a nuclear war, um, now.
Oh my god. Yeah, it's very scary. I do think that that treaty is no longer, that is what I found in my research, that it was destroyed in 2019. So,
Well, shit.
I I don't know what else to say about that. Um, let's try to end on a lighter note than that. Let me think for a second.
Okay, what do you got?
Um, oh, you know what? You wrote a bit about this kind of sacred land that's not too far from Greenham, the Salisbury Plain and Silbury Hill and Stonehenge.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about why that was so significant for you all at Greenham?
Yeah, so the long answer is that every time the nuclear convoy would leave the base, they would go 40 miles. It was a 40-mile drive. They would close the roads for 40 miles and just take these nuclear weapons to Salisbury Plain. And Salisbury Plain is where Avalon is. It's where the Arthurian legends were. It's this ancient, ancient matriarchal pagan holy land, and now it's military land. I don't know if it's still military land, but it was. There was an army base built inside of Salisbury Plain, and there was shelling fields and tank crossings. So Stonehenge is an old, old, old lunar observatory, really, is what it is. It was created probably 8,000 years ago. Still nobody knows how it was made. It's these giant, heavy, super heavy stones that are stood up in all these stone circles. And on the lunar eclipse, the moon shines right through and hits this one stone, this super sacred stone, exactly. These things were pre-astronomy, but they really had stuff figured out, these folks that lived back then. But we did a little 3-day walk across Salisbury Plain and cut through those stones, and that was pretty cool. That whole area is sacred matriarchal place.
You were describing something, some sort of structure of like a woman giving birth. Am I making that up?
No, no, you're good.
Okay.
Silbury Hill is the tallest was the tallest person-made structure of the ancient world. It's huge. It's this huge mountain that was created, by pagans and witches a long time ago, same age as, Stonehenge, probably 8,000 years ago, and it's the body of the goddess, and that huge hill is like her belly. All the structures make up her head and her feet, and it goes over miles.
It seems like you can kind of imagine that however many thousands of years ago, like this was a place without patriarchy. It just feels very significant that it's kind of a short 3-day walk from from where all this was going down.
Well, it's pretty new as far as life goes, as far as human life goes. Patriarchy is like 2 or 3,000 years old. Before that, everyone worshiped the goddess worldwide. And it wasn't about like hating man or some separatist. The goddess had sons as well as daughters, but just everybody worshiped the goddess. I taught women's studies for many years, and one of the classes that I taught was about the great goddess and the evolution of human consciousness. And so this idea that a long, long time ago, like in the Paleolithic, in the Stone Age, before there was anything except the moon and the stars, people lived in caves and a woman would be pregnant. They'd be like, what is that? Because they didn't know. And then she would give birth to a baby. And then she would feed it for like 4 years out of just her body. Like that is, if you were going to make a deity out of some body, it would be a female body. And everyone agreed on that women were sacred because they made life. Men, women, everybody worshiped the goddess. And then one thing after another led to, patriarchy. And here we are.
Thanks for listening to Cruising. If you like this episode, please consider leaving us a 5-star review. It really helps others discover our podcast. Cruising is produced by a small but mighty team of 3 queer women, Rachel Karp, Jen McGinnity, and me, your host and editor, Sarah Gabrielli. Our theme song is by Joey Freeman. You can support us at buymeacoffee.com/cruisingpod, follow us on social media at cruisingpod, on Substack, cruising.substack.com, or at our website, www.cruisingpod.com.
Hey, Michael.
Hey, Tom.
Okay, so you want to tell him, or you want me to tell him?
No. I got this. People out there.
Yeah.
People, lean in. Get close. Listen, here's the deal.
We got big news.
We got monumental news. We got snacktacular news.
Yeah, after a brief hiatus, my good friend Michael Ian Black and I are coming back.
My good friend Tom Cavanaugh and I are coming back to do what we do best.
What we were put on this earth to do.
To pick a snack.
To eat a snack.
And to rate a snack.
Scientifically.
Emotionally.
Spiritually.
Mates is back.
Mike and Tom Eat Snacks is back.
A podcast for anyone with a mouth.
With a mouth. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Amy Nicholson, the film critic for the LA Times.
And I'm Paul Scheer, an actor, writer, and director. You might know me from The League, Veep, or my non-eligible for Academy Award role in Twisters.
We love movies, and we come at them from different perspectives.
Yeah, like Amy thinks that, Joe Pesci was miscast in Goodfellas, and I don't.
He's too old. Let's not forget that Paul thinks that Dune 2 is overrated.
It is.
Anyway, despite this, we come together to host Unspooled, a podcast where we talk about good movies, critical hits,
fan favorites, must-sees, and in case you missed them.
We're talking Parasite to Home Alone.
From Grease to The Dark Knight.
We've done deep dives on popcorn flicks. We've talked about why Independence Day deserves a second look.
And we've talked about horror movies, some that you've never even heard of, like Ganja and Hess.
So if you love movies like we do, come along on our cinematic adventure.
Listen to Unspooled wherever you get your podcasts.
And don't forget to hit the follow button.